why leave to start your own? What was the spark or what was the moment that said, all right, I got to do this?
I think the biggest thing was just one of the partners I work for, the reward for eating the most cake is getting more cake. And I watched the partners above me working even harder and putting in more time because it's just a flywheel. You got to keep it going. And there's really not the support you need to scale and get out of what you're doing. You're always going to be billing hours. You're always going to be looking for more hours. You're going to be looking for business that is driven by hours. And at the end of the day, we have a very limited set of hours, and it's how do you want to choose to spend it?
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. Excited to have a friend of mine on today. He's a recent law firm founder. He's about 4 months in or so. Today we've got John Martin. John, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your practice and how it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be on. I've been listening to this podcast ever since it came out. I think I'm a few episodes behind at the moment, but I've been listening to every single one of them as they come out. My name's John Martin. I'm with Tree Bank Legal and happy to be on today.
So, John, your background, we'll get into a lot of it, but your legal career, at least my understanding, it's basically been all big law. You were big law, then bigger law, and then you went from that to about as small as you can get. It's just you, right?
I did have a couple of contractors so far, but yeah, it's just me. And that's been a lot different. I started my legal career in 2016, was with a large regional firm doing national work, and then went to our entire practice group picked up and moved to a very large national firm. Yeah, it's definitely been a transition, but a good one.
So tell me about your practice area and really both before like big law and then now, and then maybe how is it different, if at all?
Yeah, so my practice is corporate. And when I started out, I was doing general M&A for my first firm. And a lot of that was in the tech transactions area. So lots of software, lots of IP, that kind of thing. And then as I got a couple years into that, I started working with a particular partner who did insurance M&A. And a lot of the transactions I've done over probably the last 6 years are more related to the insurance industry, buying and selling insurance brokerages. But my real passion is with manufacturing. I came out of a family business, and I like to call them backbone businesses. They're the guys that are fixing your air conditioner. You look around your office things and you're like, where did that come from? Chances are there's a U.S. manufacturer that's doing it. So that's where it's shifted since I've left. And then I have a particular focus on family businesses. So having come out of a family business, one of my passions is trying to help generational transfers occur between owners and children or relatives, however that may happen. So it's a little bit of a different flavor. And I've done a few of those along the way, but I think I'm particularly well suited under this structure to really help those folks out.
So I do want to get into your background for sure. But before we get there, like you said, you were at a really big firm. And let's talk about that just for a minute. Most big firms, you got a big time hourly annual requirement. You're working all the time. It's just go from that environment to having your own shop. What was that like?
Liberating. It's the first word I come up with. And I'm sure we'll get into this too, but everything I'm doing now is flat fee. So removing that hourly requirement, it was funny. The first month or so that I was out on my own, I would sit down to work on whatever it was for a client. And I would immediately be filled with this sense of dread because it's like, I can see all these things that I'd like to do to make my life easier in the future and all these things that I think would be really good for the client, but they're not necessarily specific to that task and accomplishing that task for that client. So being able to invest the time to get things right, not only for this client, but in case I need to use that work or some of that work in the future, being able to do that has just been immensely free. And now I sit down and I get excited about working on stuff because I'm not worried about if I do it right or if I take a little bit of extra time to add something to it that isn't absolutely necessary. It's not on the client's time. We've already agreed to the price and they're going to get a very high quality product without me having to discount time or worry about my own billable requirements. So that's been nice. And I enjoy the management aspect of things. Not that there's a lot to manage yet, but I like thinking strategically. And the hourly model just doesn't compensate for that. My last firm, I found myself doing what I think a lot of people would call middle management. It took a lot of time, but there wasn't any payoff for me because I would have to then go find hours to make up for it. So it just extended the workday. And now I can blend those two things, not worry about, am I going to hit my bonus hours? Am I going to get paid? Is it good for the client? Can I bill that to the client? So I think liberating is really the word that I would say comes to mind when you talk about the transition.
Yeah, I get it on the client work and the hours and the service work. But what about, I never worked at a really big firm, but my sense is that you have everything you need if you want it. You need a legal opinion on whatever, you just get on the firm directory. You can call somebody, they may be 3 states over, wherever, you can do that. If you need, obviously the supply closet's probably huge. Everything you need is probably right there. And then you go from that to like, all right, man, it's all on you.
I need to run to Office Depot. I'm out of Prairie. Yeah, that's been a transition. And I think, at least in my experience, you see some firms, none of the ones that I worked at, you see some firms separate even Christmas parties, right? You have your staff Christmas party and you have your attorney Christmas party. And it always got under my skin that people really didn't appreciate the staff. The bottom line is attorneys at Big Law could not do what they do without the staff. And having that bifurcation to me was just odd. To me, it was all one team. Everybody had their place. And granted, some of us invested more in our education and have a little bit more particular skill set, which garnered higher wages, but it's really all a team. And so I have missed the staff. It's nice to be able to hand something off, say, hey, I need this formatted, or hey, send this to so-and-so. One of the first things I had to deal with was trying to send documents via certified mail. I was like, I don't even know where the post office is. Yeah. Where's the closest post office? And then asking the person at the counter, like, how do I do this? What do I fill out? What's the appropriate mail?
You have figured out you can do that online, right? Certified mail online. Can you figure that out yet?
Did not know
Yes.
that.
Yeah. You could just upload. Yeah.
Did not know that. That's a really good tip.
Yeah. Another sense I have, again, I wasn't in Big Law, but it's like you're on a tanker and you've got committees everywhere manning the tanker versus being on a speedboat that can turn on a dime. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that aspect of the change.
Yeah. The analogy I use is an aircraft carrier. If you got a guy on watch and you say, hey, there's a beach 300 miles ahead, the captain's going to shrug his shoulders and go, we'll turn eventually. However, if you throw an iceberg out there and you say, hey, there's an iceberg 200 yards out, he's going to take immediate action. And that's how law firms are. They really don't change strategy, directives. It's all a very slow change. I wanted to trial some new software in my last firm. And I asked them, I was like, hey, what do I need to do this? And they said, put in a budget request. And it was 6 months out. And then we'll take a look at it for the following year. And one of the first things I did on my own is I looked at several pieces of software and said, you know what, this is the one I like. And I hit subscribe and it available within a couple days. Yeah, being able to make decisions on things like that is much easier. Just the level of bureaucracy. And you have to have some level of bureaucracy with any organization, but there's healthy and there's unhealthy. Unhealthy really hampers growth, hampers innovation. A healthy bureaucracy is going to keep you on target, keep people from straying off, make sure your resources are all going to the place where they're most valuable. So that's been a lot easier, especially when it's a committee of one.
Yeah. Okay, so another question. Again, my sense is the big firms have really big clients, big corporate clients. I'm wondering, did you take any clients with you? I'm guessing the answer is maybe yes, but probably no.
Did. I took everybody that I had brought in. They all came with me. I think I had signed engagement letters from 6 or 8 clients within a week of leaving. So that was nice. And they were all, truth be told, most of my clients were not suited for big firms. The rates, process for getting things done, they need a little bit more nimble. They still need high level counsel, but the billable hour model just wasn't the right one for them. And big firms are set up for institutional clients. The clients are playing with somebody else's money, and they usually hire big firms because if anything goes wrong, and the CFO or whoever it is that hired the firm can say, look, I hired XYZ firm and they're the best in the business and nobody's going to question that. But if they go hire single shingle and something goes wrong, they might catch some flack for making that decision. The clients I want to serve are really, again, as backbone businesses, middle market, 1 to 50 million in revenue. The guys that need the counsel, they have some true need for sophisticated counsel, but the fee structures just aren't the right fit for them.
You had what to a lot of people, a lot of lawyers maybe, might seem like a good gig at a big firm making good money. Why leave to start your own? What was the spark or what was the moment that said, all right, I got to do this?
I think the biggest thing was just one of the partners I work for, the reward for eating the most cake is getting more cake. And I watched the partners above me working even harder and putting in more time because it's just a flywheel. You got to keep it going. And there's really not the support you need to scale and get out of what you're doing. You're always going to be billing hours. You're always going to be looking for more hours. You're going to be looking for business that is driven by hours. And at the end of the day, we have a very limited set of hours, and it's how do you want to choose to spend it? So for me, it was, all right, I'd rather go do something that I feel like I can build and scale and offer good service to clients, still feel like I'm winning at the end of the day. And if I do something more efficiently, more effectively for the same price, and I spend less time doing it, that's a huge win for me.
The other interesting thing that I've heard over the years from big firm lawyers that have left, the reaction from the folks they're leaving behind. So you've announced you're leaving, and it's usually generally maybe two camps. There's the camp that thinks you're crazy. They're like, why in the world would you do that? It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Then there's the other camp that's, man, I wish I could do it too, or something like that. What kind of reaction did you get?
In my case, it wasn't a surprise for them at all. I was probably more vocal than I should have been. Displeasure with systems and bureaucracy and the way things were run. So it wasn't a surprise to anyone, and it was very well received. They were very supportive. I got a referral yesterday from my old firm that said, hey, this guy can help you out with this. He's better suited to do it than us. So for me, it was a really good transition, very supportive.
That's good. Let's go back. So law is, I think, maybe a second, maybe even a third career for you. And let's go way back. So you were in maybe one of the biggest bureaucracies there is, the U.S. Army.
Yeah, it definitely tops the cake there.
Yeah, so let's go back. So you were an Army Ranger, right?
I was, yeah. I
So,
was in 3rd and 75th down at Fort Benning.
and how long did you do that?
I joined straight out of high school in 1996, and I got out in November of 99, a little over 3 years.
And I guess after that, you went to college, right, for engineering?
It's been a very fun 6 years in college.
So take me back. When I was 18, I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. If you can go back, why Army versus going straight to college? Was there a reason or was it just?
Yeah, there was a lot of reasons. And as a tech guy, you may not appreciate this, but I had academic rides to both Clemson and my parents were very encouraging to go to tech. That's where you need to go. And my heart was at Clemson, but I had eventually committed to go to Georgia Tech. I got to July, so I would have started. My parents had paid the housing deposit, and I got to thinking about it. I was like, I just cannot live in a big city. I can't go to Atlanta. That's just not the right place for me. And the only good out I saw at that point was joining up. That's what I did. I rode Georgia Tech from basic training, and they returned my parents' housing deposit.
Wow, I never knew you almost went to Tech, man.
Yeah, that was close, man. We could have been classmates. You started in what, 95, 96?
94, fall of 94.
Yeah, so we very well could have been classmates.
And you ended up in Atlanta anyway.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, so you were an Army Ranger for a while. That's an intense experience. I'm sure I haven't done it, but as you look back on your career, what sorts of lessons do you think are things that you learned in the Army that maybe has stuck with you that you use today, if any?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that definitely shaped me. I would not be the same person that I am. I think probably the biggest thing for the Army, a lot of guys think of, especially special operations, people think of those guys and they're like stat dudes that feel no pain and don't need to sleep or eat. And that's really not the case. What they're looking for is people with mental toughness. Anybody that tries for it can make it if they don't quit. They will recycle you as long as you don't give up. So a lot of the entry standards are really designed just to see, are you the kind of person that's not going to quit? And that makes everything else in life a lot easier. You know, when you're listening to your law school classmates complain or colleague complain, and you're like, at least I didn't just get thrown out of an airplane and hadn't spent 3 days soaking wet and starving without any sleep. Everything else is a little bit easier after that.
I guess the Socratic method was like cakewalk for you, getting yelled at in the Army.
Yeah, they weren't cussing and screaming at me and making me do push-ups. The worst thing can happen is I might look a little stupid. I'm used to that.
But it sounds like you've always been tech inclined. So after the Army, you ended up going to get an engineering degree, right?
That's great. Clemson.
Okay. And then after that, what did you do?
So I went back at Clemson. I co-opted. So I got some really good corporate experience there. I worked for a very large international corporation. It was actually Electrolux. We made Frigidaire refrigerators, and that was great. You got to see a different level of corporate bureaucracy. It wasn't quite the Army, but there was still a lot of structure there, very clear reporting structure. But then after Clemson, I went back to work at the family business. So it was my dad and a non-family leader, and then me. You got to jump in and do whatever's necessary. And they were very enthusiastic about having someone that was willing to take a look at things and solve problems. So that was a great experience.
And what was the family business?
They do steel wire for concrete construction primarily, but then also industrial wire. So if you go into Publix, the shopping carts, chances are all the wire in that shopping cart came out of the facility in South Carolina that my family owns.
Oh, wow. Just raw manufacturing components or wiring. Basically, that's it. Just
Yeah. And we were also importing finished goods from China that were competitive with the products we were making in the concrete construction industry. It was a very interesting business from a supply chain perspective because we bought raw materials. Sometimes we sold raw materials because it's a commodity product. And if we had something we'd bought low, we'd sell it high. And you bought and sold at every stage of the process. So it might be semi-finished at a different stage. It might be a finished good. And then we were also introducing materials at all those levels too. So we might buy semi-finished goods from China and finish them out. We might buy the finished goods. We might buy anything and anywhere. So it was a really interesting supply chain.
So I know we've had lots of conversations over the years about your views on law firms and how they're not really well run. And I agree with you on that. So I'm curious, your experience operating the family business, what sort of influence, good or bad, has that had on you in terms of now that you're inside of a big law firm and seeing how it's run?
The thing that always blew me away about law firms was the focus on revenue. If you want to make more money, you bill more hours or you bill more per hour. And those were the two levers that the law firms worked. And in the family business, especially with it being a commodity steel business, we didn't have as much of a lever to work on revenue. The lever we had to work was cost. So if you wanted to get more profits, then you had to reduce cost. And I've never understood why law firms don't take more of a focus on that. Obviously, increasing revenue is good, and you can fix some of those costs, your hourly, your attorney costs, what you're paying your attorneys, what you're paying your staff. But there really wasn't any focus on efficiency. And I honestly don't see a whole lot of difference in what we do as lawyers in what somebody's doing in a manufacturing business. At the end of the day, we're producing a product. How do you get that product to the client in the most efficient manner at the highest quality? And that, to me, it always blew me away that there wasn't more of a focus on that quality control and the cost of getting it out of the door.
And we've had conversations on this, but to that point, on focus on revenue in law firms, and it's really two pieces that are interesting to me as I think through it. It's one, sort of the overall revenue or overall profit of the firm by reducing costs versus just increasing revenue. But then also the way they comp, most firms comp owners, and it's all based on, it's really revenue. It's never, there are some firms out there that maybe factor in profitability somehow, some way, but not every practice area is the same. Obviously, if I have lower rates, but I have the same overall revenue as somebody down the hall with higher rates, or maybe I need 10 people to generate the same amount of revenue as somebody down the hall that only needs 2, obviously it's a completely different profit model for the firm, but many times the firms basically pay them the same just because there's a formula and it's revenue based. And I'm not going to say it's easy, and lawyers are not easy to deal with sometimes. And
Especially when you got a lot of them in the same room.
Right.
The other big problems, you got 90 partners or however many hundreds of partners trying to make a decision.
well, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. Decision making in a big organization where you don't have a chief. The managing partner, to the non-lawyers out there, they view managing partner as the CEO. That's really not what it is at all.
It's head psychologist.
Yeah, exactly.
Managing egos and nothing more.
Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So we'll get into your insights or your view on the revenue versus cost. I think that played a lot in your ideas on how to build a firm or what you want to build. We'll get that in a minute, but let's go back before we get there real quick. So you were an engineer, you're working at the family business. Why go to law school? What attracted you to the law?
The first thing I'll say is I never, ever imagined being a lawyer. That was probably the last thing on my list of potential careers. And I never even crossed my mind until one of my engineering buddies was leaving college. I was like, what are you going to do, man? He's like, I'm going to law school. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, intellectual property. That's where it's at. Okay. So I was like, well, maybe I could, kind of in the back of my head. But then as I worked at the family business, I was in charge of the purchasing in China. So I had attorneys in Shanghai and doing contract work, attorneys in DC doing trade law. We did some proprietary software at one point. So I had an IP attorney. I felt like I was on the phone with my HR attorney every other day because we had employees that we were dealing with. I had just a general corporate lawyer. And then finally, we got into some litigation. Trying to hire a litigator was just overwhelming because everybody's speaking a language you don't understand, and you're trying to judge it on reviews and people, and there's really no objective criteria. It was just foreign. And through all those interactions with lawyers, I would get to the end of whatever project it was, and I go, well, that seems easy. If I just knew the rules, I could probably do a lot of this. I went to my dad, and in parallel with those experiences, working in a family business is tough. You're working with family. And we were in a pretty heightened period of conflict among me, my brother, and I went to dad and I said, look, everybody needs a break. How about you cut my salary, cut my duties, and I'll go to law school. That'll give us some time and space to figure out how we're going to work together. And at the end of the day, I can come back and I'll have a little bit more of a background. I had no illusions of actually being able to do everything that the company needed, but at least I would have a basis for negotiating with lawyers and communicating with lawyers. So that's what drove the decision. And about halfway through, we came to a mutual agreement that I would just exit the business and practice law for a few years. So.
Probably didn't hurt all those really high attorney invoices you were paying out of the business.
Yeah, I got sick of paying them, man. That's always my facetious answer is, I just got sick of paying attorneys.
I wanted to send those invoices out instead of having to pay them. All right, so let's fast forward to your firm now. You had your engineering, manufacturing, business experience before law school, which I know a lot of lawyers, a lot of smart lawyers that went straight from undergrad. I took a little time off, but I wasn't really working in business. I was goofing off and working things here and there. But the folks that went to law school as a second career, my classmates always felt like they had some wisdom that the rest of us maybe didn't have. So you have that background, you're in law, then you go work at the big firms, you're informed by the limitations of the big platform. So you say, all right, I want to go out because I want to go make a go at it. So I know we've talked about this a lot. So why don't you lay it out? So as you're going out to start your firm, what is it that you say, all right, I want to do something differently? What are you thinking?
So the biggest thing I want to do is give clients certainty out the door. What is this going to cost? And a lot of that was driven from my experience of dealing with lawyers. When I went to pick up the phone to call somebody with a problem, I didn't know if it was going to be a $500 problem, a $5,000 problem, or a $50,000 problem. And even after that conversations, a lot of times you still didn't know because you're on the clock and you just don't get a lot of visibility into what's going to happen on the lawyer side. And it was a frustration of mine at the big firms when I would want to quote somebody something, I'd say, it might cost 50 to 75, but it might go up to 125,000. And I just don't think that's right. One of the things we counsel clients on as lawyers is risk and reducing your risk. And yet our engagement letters put every bit of the risk on the client. And so what I want to do and what I am doing is when a client comes to me with a problem, I say, all right, let's work through it. And I invest a little bit of time up front and I say, all right, here's everything I need to happen. Here's the analysis. And then here's what it's going to cost to get you there. And I'm pretty careful in how I scope or how I draft my scopes of work. I make sure that it's pretty detailed. Here's the things that I'm going to do. And then I have a disclaimer at the bottom. If any of these other things that happen, or we need specialized counsel, or the structure changes, or any of these things, then we'll have to come back and talk about the next piece of the puzzle and what that's going to cost. So everything I do is flat. Everything I do is just fully described in a scope of work, and the client knows what they're getting out the door, and then they can make an informed decision as to how they're going to proceed and whether it's worth it.
I think that's great. I do some flat fees. I do some hourly. I do a variety of things. I have some sort of monthly retainer type. And I can tell you, it's an experiment that is ongoing. It never ends. There's some where I've just completely lost my shirt on for sure. So I'm going to put myself in the shoes of all the lawyers out there that bill by the hour that say, you can't do that. Maybe it works for you, but it'll never work for me. So I guess the first question is, what's your approach and how have you set the flat fees and determine the scope? And then what happens if you get in and the scope increases? How do you deal with that?
Well, it sounds so far. And right now, as you said, it's an experiment. Honestly, I think my prices might be too low right now because I don't have a full lot of pushback, which tells me that there's probably some room there and some elasticity. But I'm thinking about my past experience and I look at something and it's, okay, how many hours? And I don't even like to say how many hours would it have taken, but come down to it, that's my only data point. There's not good data out there for what it costs to do X, Y, or Z. It's like the opacity of healthcare. You never know what it's really going to cost. So I'm trying to just get some things out there and then being cognizant of, okay, that took a lot longer for whatever reason. So on the next one, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. But the other thing the flat fees do for me is when I do something once, if I put a little bit of extra time into it and set it up in a way that I can go back and use that again for the next time, then my theory is that every time I do something, I'm probably going to lose my shirt the first time, but then the second, third, fourth, fifth time, that profitability is going to go up. It really is just throwing it out there, seeing what sticks, and then adjusting as you go.
That is the mindset. I think that is it. You never know how it's going to go, but lawyers just almost universally, but I might lose. Yeah, you might lose. You might.
You're going to lose.
You're going to have to fail, at least in the early stages. And you see this in business. They just set a price and they just go with it. Maybe they end up raising the price. Maybe they end up lowering the price. And then once you get out there and you see enough of it, then you can make adjustments. So how are your clients? Are they receptive to this? Do they like it better? Are they just along for the ride in the experiment with you? What's been the reception?
Everybody that I've put it in front of so far is hugely enthusiastic. I haven't had anybody say, I'd rather you just bill me an hourly rate. Usually the response I get, especially with somebody that's new, is, all right, nobody else does it that way. That seems like a good price. Yeah, let's do it. I think they really appreciate the certainty. And this is something else I drew on from my experience in the family business, whether it was consultants, whether it was lawyers. I would always ask them, hey, what would it cost for a flat fee? And one of the things I would tell them is, I would rather you quote me high and I'd pay that as a flat fee than not knowing what's going to happen, because then you can budget for it. You can plan for it. You could say, okay, I know this is expense is going to hit in this month, and you can adjust things as opposed to the hourly. Don't know the pace the lawyer's working on it. You don't know who they're going to bring in from specialty that overbills it. And they appreciate the certainty and knowing what it's going to cost, even if it might be a little bit more than somebody quotes them on an hourly basis.
So let's talk about the scope part of it. I know, like for me, when I have gotten upside down, it's because my scope was not clear. This is the first part. Or it was pretty clear, but there was scope creep and I just let it happen. So what are your thoughts on scope and scope creep and how to deal with it and how to communicate to the client about that?
Yeah, and I think I've run into that situation a few times already. I think my thing on it is, if I got slack in my and somebody texts on an NDA, hey, I need this NDA, I got a form for that. It'll probably take me 15 minutes. And I'm not going to go to the trouble of a scope of work, quoting for that, especially if it's a larger engagement. I'm just going to throw that in. Now, if it's something that's a little bit bigger, like negotiating a new LOI that popped up, then I'm going to say, hey, look, and I think the biggest thing is early. As soon as you start talking about it, identify it. Hey, this is getting a little out of scope. Do you want me to send you a proposal for what it's going to cost? And oh, yeah, that's fine. No problem. I get it. So I think the key thing with scope creep is being able to be willing to eat a little bit. But even then, I identify and say, hey, this is out of scope, but it's easy. I can knock it out. I'll throw it in. And that generates some goodwill with the client. And then on the ones where it's not, you can't just throw it in, making sure you communicate it early and get that on the table just as soon as it comes up. And that way they start thinking about it, and it's not a surprise when you come back to them, a week later and go, hey, I thought about this and it's way out of scope. Always keeping that in the front of mind. Is it in scope? Is it not in scope? And then identifying it early.
Yeah, because it comes to mind, you got an M&A deal, let's say, and you say, all right, I'm going to close this deal for you, XYZ. Then you get in the middle of it and the deal changes 3 or 4 different times. And what was the original deal is completely different, the third iteration of it. And the client says, well, you said you're going to close the deal. And you're like, wait a second. What I said was I would close that deal. Now we're on a different deal. So how do you deal with that with the client? What sort of communication, or how do you handle the expectations on that? That can happen a lot. Certainly in litigation. That's what scares the hell out of the litigators about flat fees. But how would you deal with it on an M&A transaction?
So the way I draft my scope of work for an M&A transaction is I put a note in there. It says, assuming that this is going to be a stock purchase or an asset purchase with standard tax complications. Please know that if any kind of reorganization or stock purchase or any of these things could increase the cost, then it's on me to, again, identify those things early and say, hey, our fee was structured on these assumptions that are turning out not to be true. I need to add some for this, and then just have the conversation. And usually people get it. They're like, hey, I get it. This is a lot more complex. And I had a client come to me the other day where I'm starting to get into some scope creep. And I warned them early. I said, look, this was not part of the original scope. And we kept going on. And they came back to me and said, we understand that this is not in scope. Please let us know what the additional fee is going to be. So I think by and large, people get it. They're in business too, right? And they know that if they're providing more work or that something changes, they would do the same thing. And I'm sure I'm going to run into people that like, no, this is what it was. And okay, you learn and you move on. But again, some of that is accepting a little bit of risk, and every other business in the world does it. No business is as risk-free as law. everybody wins some and loses some. I think the communication is key, and then just the willingness to accept the risk that every now and then you're going to have one that doesn't work out.
It may not be perfect. Pretty close comparison to me is anybody who's been through a construction project or renovation project or building a house or whatever. It's like you're hiring a contractor to build a house. You got your plans and your specs and you're buying a house. And then you get in it halfway through and you're like, all right, I want to change the windows. We're going to upgrade the faucet that I had. I want it 2 times better. We're going to put this other thing over here. Oh, and move the counter over here, different countertops. And you start getting the change orders. So you get the change orders, you're upgrading, and that's everybody knows that's just the way it happens. And the law is really could be handled the same way, I think. Lawyers aren't really trained or experienced in that kind of invoicing and scoping and billing, but it's doesn't mean you can't, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's about the other half of it, along with clear communication, both upfront and along the way, is a willingness to accept the risk. You got to take a little bit of risk to do it that way.
And I'm not to sit here and say it's easy. It's a little bit of hard work. You got to put in the work and you got to experiment, but it can be done. I'm with you. And I say keep going for that. So let's move it on. So I know another big thing to you are systems and processes and automations and that sort of thing. And I suspect that goes back to your engineering and manufacturing days.
And Army to some
Oh,
degree.
wow. Yeah. I know it's a big thing. A lot of law firms, a lot of consultants are out there say, get your processes, get your SOPs together. But maybe take me through your experience in the big firm versus how you're seeing yourself do it in your firm.
I don't know what firms you're thinking about that have processes. I haven't seen them. It always blew me away that if a partner handed out an assignment, that there wasn't start with this form, take these steps, do these things, because it would have been so much easier, especially as a brand new associate, to have something to refer to. And instead, it was like, go on the system and see what you can find. And then you're cobbling things together and making it up as you go. And then you talk to somebody else and like, oh, yeah, I have one of those. Would have worked perfectly. And a lot of it has to do with captured data. There's not an index, even naming files. You go to search for something on the system, you don't know what you're searching for. Somebody might have called it an SBA. Somebody might have called it a stock purchase agreement. Somebody might have called it a purchase agreement. Somebody might have just saved it up as agreement. So you never know what to look for. You never know how to find it. And one of my basic processes that I actually implemented in big law within our practice group was the file naming. Like when we name a file, it's going to be the client's name, the other party's name, separated by space, underscore space, and then whatever it is. And we're always going to call it an asset purchase agreement. And then we're going to tack on APA just in case. And then it's going to be the date, the version. Every time. That's what it's going to be. And that's just that simple thing right there. Of making and granted, starting out, it was hard because I had to rename every single document that the partner says. But as I had people coming up under me, I could mandate that and say, this is the way we're going to do it. And then I think by the time I got out, even the partners were saying with the same naming scheme, because they appreciated the ability to find what they were looking for. All right. Taking processes, something as simple as that, just really increases your efficiency and your effectiveness.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit because change is so hard to do anywhere. But you're at a big firm and you've got, you have your little team. It took you a long time to implement those file naming systems on your team. Multiply that out by hundreds of partners across dozens of offices. How the hell can you get that done? And then you got all these lawyers that this is the way I do it. You can never tell me to change. It's just so damn hard. And I think about this a lot. Part of what you're describing, the way I call it knowledge management. And it's as a firm grows, how do you systematize the knowledge management process? And that's both from, this is probably something you did in the military, but these, I don't even know what you call it, but almost like an assessment after a deal. So you do a deal, all these provisions change, good and bad, and then you have a post-deal assessment, and then you figure out how to incorporate that into your knowledge management system to then use again. But then you've got 20 different teams doing these deals. So how do you manage all the inputs Do you have any ideas on that? I'm serious because this is something I think about a lot as my firm is growing. How do we put the stuff in place now so that as we scale, it's just there and we don't have to force the change later?
And I think there's two obstacles that are really standing in front of getting to any kind of centralized control. One of them is management that we've talked about. There really is no centralized management. You got 90 partners that do it their way, and telling them that they're going to have to do it your way, they'll just go somewhere else. They're not going to stand for it. But then the other one is training. You have to communicate those standards to people. And there is no real training in big law. It's incumbent upon the team that you're working for to get you to the level they want you to be. And there's no centralized, I say there's none, but when there is centralized training, in my experience, generally people will go to it for a couple sessions and some big deal will be going on or some big case or whatever it is. The partner says, "Nah, I can't have you wasting your time on that. You got to do this." And so what that does, there's no real commitment to it. And what that does is you get people just following their team or whoever they're working with. You got to solve the training problem and you got to solve the management problem. And for you and me, that's going to be easy, right? We got to think ahead about how we structure the firm to make sure that anybody coming in is on board with those processes. And then you manage them to hold them accountable and say, no, you didn't do it that way. I'm sorry. And again, that comes to upfront communication with the people you're hiring. This is the way we're going to do it. If you don't like it, tell me now. And then you can move through that. I think you've had a lot of conversations on the show about firing. You got to be willing to do that to get the right people that see the goal and are willing to move toward it.
So let's talk about training. I know it's a big sort of passion project of yours, really. And it's funny
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the view from most people is the big firms give you this immense training and you come out like super trained. And it sounds like maybe that's not always the case. And I get it. Like you just said, the pressures to bill hours and get stuff done may be so great that you learn by experience and maybe your direct supervisor, quote, trains you, but there's not really any deliberate and systematic training, let's call it. I know we've had conversations about this as something that would be extremely valuable to big firms, really, training their staff, their younger attorneys. Because another thing that we all hear is a partner comes in and if somebody under them screws something up once, they're like, they suck, get rid of them. When maybe it's not fair to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I would see is you get a summer or you get a new associate class of 10 people, right? And you maybe had 2 or 3 that just got it. And everybody loved working with them because they just got it. You didn't have to take any extra step to get those people performing at the level you needed them to. And then you had 2 or 3 at the bottom out of 10 didn't get it, didn't want to get it, were never going to get it. And then you had 6 to 7 in the middle, or 4 to 5 in the middle. I can't remember my math there, but 4 to 5 in the middle. If you just gave them a little bit of a nudge and a little bit of help, and they would be at the same level as those top 2 or 3. And I think one of the failures in law firms is not along with that of the 10, they're just thrown to the wolves. So go find a partner, go find work, and the partners are looking for whoever they can. And if you had a training program that would identify the people that were good and then identify the people that needed a little bit of help, but then also identify the people that just needed to go now. They're not going to get it. They don't need to linger for 2 or 3 years just floating between teams that don't want them. Go ahead and get rid of them. You're doing a disservice to them by delaying their career. They're not getting what they need. And chances are they just don't like it, but they don't want to leave because the money's good. So if you had a training program along with management to where, and again, enforcing this with partners is the hard part, right? But you got 2 or 3 that they want to do work with, and those people are getting overworked. They're just getting slammed. Typically, they'll leave after a couple of years because they're just burnt out. They can't handle it. And so you're stuck with that middle group that kind of moves through and eventually figures it out. But if you could accelerate it for them and then have somebody managing the workflow so that partner says, no, I don't want to work with that guy because he screwed up whatever. We've already identified that. We've given them remedial training. He should be good now. And the partner right now in most structures is just going to go, nah, not working with him. I'm going to give this work to the other guy because there is no formal allocation. It's just whoever they want to work with and whoever says yes to what they're asking for. I think it's a failure in management, failure in training. And I will say about the big firms, you learn. a lot. Just from seeing stuff, doing stuff, and screwing stuff up, the end result is amazing. Like, you really have a high caliber of legal knowledge and how to apply it when you get to the end of that period, but it's not fun. And I think you could accelerate.
Real quick, they need the training. They need more formalized training. What sorts of ideas have you come up with? Any ideas about what that would actually look like?
Yes. So a lot or most of your learning in a big firm comes through making mistakes and then having the partner correct it. And I'll take due diligence as a good example. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. I never understood why they gave that to first year associates, because they don't have the experience to know what they're looking at and how to apply it and why it might matter. But I have built my own training program and actually have it in the form of a syllabus to hopefully teach a class at Georgia State. And we'll call it Transactions 101, How to Add Value as a First Year Associate. Where I think a lot of the failure is it's real focused on how and not the why. So if you take disclosure schedules, due diligence, and you say, why is this important? I had no idea for probably a year, 2 years. And then finally somebody's like, did you look at the reps and warranties in the agreement? I'm like, and that due diligence process is designed around those reps and warranties. So if you take the time to explain to a first year associate, hey, these reps and warranties, here's what they mean. Here's why they're important. And oh, by the way, if you held up your diligence request list, you're going to see a lot of the same stuff on this request list that you're seeing in the reps and warranties. And then it clicks. Oh, not only do I know how to do it, just reading documents and pulling out provisions that I think are important or that the partner asked for, it's, oh, I got to think about it in this context. And that adds a layer of critical thinking that you wouldn't otherwise have. Breaking down the why, I think is extremely important, and giving them the basis for what they're doing along with the how. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's a great idea. This is what I would say. It's great you want to go teach that at Georgia State Law School, and you should at some point. Well, why not just create this course, man, and sell it to associates now? I mean, you could do a lot more impact, right?
Oh, and man, I've had some conversations about that. Two things. One of them, garnered from your wisdom, is focus. What's important right now? And that's getting the legal work done so you get the money in to support initiatives like this. But then number two, I really want to teach the course.
Yeah.
Say, is this working? Is it right? And catch the things that maybe make sense, maybe don't make sense, so that when I do ultimately go to package it and sell it as a training program for first year associates, I've vetted a lot of those issues and strengthened the whole program.
Okay. Hear me out. You could vet it through a beta class that you put out there. I'll tell you, I imagine teaching a class is a lot of work. It just is a lot of work. Hell, just doing a 1 hour CLE, getting ready for that is a lot of work. I can imagine a whole semester. But yeah, you could get a small cohort of 10 or 8 or 5 associates from around here and do a little course, man. We should talk about this offline. I think that's,
Yeah, it sounds like a joint venture, man.
well, I'll cheer from the side, but I'll be one of you. You can train me. No, I think that's a great idea, though. I really do. I'm serious. Yeah, you should explore that, man. Maybe not wait for the Georgia State class. But anyway, all right, man. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit. So your firm name, you got Tree Bank Legal. So I do love a trade name for law firm. Why the name, and what was your thought process behind trade name?
I think it was probably your advice is the reason I went with it. Even deeper than that, ideally, I'm not doing a whole lot of legal work 2 years from now. I really did this to start a business and to run a business, not necessarily to practice law. I want to take the training, I want to take the processes, I want to take the procedures and build an organization that is independent of me. I think naming an organization with your name goes cross purposes to that overall intent. I know you've had some conversations about being able to sell to third parties. If it's got my name in it, it makes it a little bit harder. It's a little less value. So if I can make it more about the brand and more about the product and less about me, then I think that's going to add value to the company the long term.
Yeah, for those out there that don't have a trade name, if you get big enough and well known enough without it, clearly that's your brand. But the other issue that I've seen a lot of is the coming and going of the various named partners. And it's just like you're constantly changing the name and the letterhead and the website URL. And then all of a sudden, some youngster says, "Hey, I've got a bigger book of business, so I should be second, not third in the names." And it's just a lot of angst and conflict for nothing. If you have nobody's names in it, then it's just a fight nobody's going to have. So that's another
Well, for the record, I don't ever intend to have equity partners.
that's another way to solve it too. Yeah. All right. So another question, I know you'd given a lot of thought about your firm before you started it. I know you had, made budgets and you thought about this and that. You talked to a lot of people, and that was on the front end. So now that you're 4 months in and you're on the other side of it, is there anything that you can think of that was unexpected or that maybe you hadn't thought of going into it?
Yeah, the really one thing, and I'm sure there's going to be more just because I haven't been at it long enough. But the one thing is cash flow. With the flat fees, you get a chunk up front and then you get chunks at each milestone. Some of that's dependent on me having the capacity to get the work out, and some of that's dependent on the pace of the client. So I've had a couple situations where I've had it right to the finish line, but for whatever reason, the client needed some more time or wasn't quite ready or whatever, and I hadn't hit that milestone yet. Now, granted, most of these clients I could probably go to and say, "Hey, we're there. Can you pay up?" I hadn't had to do that yet. I hadn't wanted to do that. But with the hourly model, you're getting paid as you go. So if you work 100 hours, you get paid for 100 hours. You get paid. Work 150 hours, you get paid for 150 hours. What I didn't anticipate is the up and down of the flat fee and when those fees are coming in. Luckily, I was fairly well padded. It's been fine, but it's not the steady flow that you would get with an hourly model. So that was something I didn't fully appreciate when I kicked all this off. And I think that will probably smooth out too, as you get more and more clients paying on regular basis and you're keeping things flowing. That'll smooth out, but just that initial kind of influx of cash and then a big gap before the rest of it starts coming in was a little bit, I don't even say surprising, but I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's something.
It's not quite the same, but it's like a contingency practice. You do get some hits up front where they don't till the end, but you're waiting till the end. Now, maybe the timeline's a little bit shorter compared to most contingency cases, but yeah, it's important as a line of credit.
Yep,
And
exactly.
it's the sort of thing where you get it before you leave. You get it while you still have the W-2 if you can. Get it before you need it. It's that old saying, that Mark Twain saying about banks. Do you remember this one? Give you an umbrella when the sun's shining, but take it away when it starts to rain. So get it when you don't need it. That's when they'll just they'll give you more than you need. So yeah, we've been at this for a little while, but I want to talk. You've given us a few hints of where you see the firm going. If you had a whiteboard here and I said, what's your long-term vision for your firm? What would you say?
I want to build this into $100 million a year business. And I don't know if it's going to take 5, 20, 50 or ever, but I really believe there's something here. And I want to do it lean, right? I don't think we've talked about this. You look at lean concepts in manufacturing, a lot of that is about doing things efficiently and doing it, having enough capacity to do what you need to do when you need to do it. So using automation, using AI, using all these technological tools, and then coupled with process and procedure, I think I can drive a lot more revenue per person. And I'm looking at it as the entire staff, not just lawyers, but revenue per person by driving some of the work to the lowest cost resource. Just like manufacturing. If you can make it on this machine, but it costs $100 an hour to run that machine, and you can make it on this machine and it only costs $50 an hour to run it, then you're going to do it on the lower cost machine. And I think having the processes, the procedures, the automation to push a lot of that down, I can really build some momentum and compete. I don't want to say I'm competing on cost, but I think cost is going to be a very attractive factor, and I can make a lot more money bottom line by using that model and trying to do it with the lowest value resource that I can, the highest quality work. That's my vision, is building a true business that has people doing, to borrow a phrase from Jim Collins, has the right people in the right seats on the bus and get anybody that's not on the bus off. So One thing we hadn't talked about is career tracks. Big firms have career tracks. You're either partner, you're either up counsel, or you go in-house. And here, if I find a first or second year associate that just loves people and wants to sell, I'll teach them enough to be able to go out and speak intelligently and get them out there selling. Get them doing the right thing, and don't stick them in an office for 8 or 9 years until they can go make that pay for themselves. They don't like doing legal work. Great. We'll find something for them. And same thing with, you got somebody that loves to draft documents. It's just a document nerd. I'll pay you for that. But structuring the firm in a way that people are doing things that they're best suited for, I think is going to drive revenue. It's going to drive quality, and it's going to drive hopefully success.
Man, I 100% agree. I know we've had this conversation before. A lot of firms, they try to stick every lawyer into the same box. And oftentimes it's through their compensation system. It's weighted to origination and working your ass off, blah, blah, blah. When some people can do it all, it's maybe in sports, somebody who can do offense, defense, all that stuff equally. But there's some people that are just really good at one thing, like Dennis Rodman. He could not shoot a basket, but he could defend like crazy. And you get these specialists in the right spots versus trying to push them where they're not. And it makes them unhappy and they're not productive. And it probably hurts the overall value of the firm and the production of the firm. And it's always really baffled me a little bit why firms don't try to, especially the big ones. When you're small, everybody's got to do a little bit of everything. But the bigger ones, you've got somebody that's really good at business development. Don't expect them to do anything else. And if somebody who's not good at business development, don't expect them to do that. And don't comp them the same. And you can't comp them the same either. And that could be a challenge, but.
Well, and I think there's such a negative connotation to the term service partner. It's the reward for paying your dues and doing your time, but everybody's, yeah, it's just a service partner. And that's one of the reasons I don't want equity partners. I don't want anybody to think, oh, that's what I'm working for and that's the goal. I want people to think I'm really good at selling. They may get comped eventually, just like they would as an equity partner at a firm if they're performing based on the objectives I set for them. But I don't want people shooting for a goal that's really illusory. I'm going to say, hey, look, this is what you're good at. I'm going to pay you the market rate for what you're good at, and I'll pay you well, but it's not going to be tied to you billing 2,200 hours a year for the last 10 years and having a partner title. It's going to be tied to your performance. It's going to be tied to what you're good at.
If you look at businesses, non-law firm businesses, you've got your outbound sales or your sales force, and then you've got your client management people. And they're usually different people. The salespeople, a good business development person wants to go whale hunting. That's what they want. Once they're in, they don't want to sit there and have to manage skill set for keeping the clients happy and really in the pipeline, and then continuing to keep them as clients. And other businesses have figured this out.
Yeah, for hundreds of years.
Forever. Law firms, most of them don't do that. But yeah, so that's really cool, man. I got it, man. I love that.
So yeah, I think people and processes, that's what it comes down to, is being able to hire, being able to get rid of the people that don't work out, and then holding people accountable, which requires management. And that's the other thing about law firms. They don't manage. There is one metric, and that's billable hours. That's it. How many hours did you bill? That was the only thing I ever got paid on for bonus, billable hours. Didn't matter if I was training associate, didn't matter some context. Even if I brought work in as an associate, didn't matter. And that's very easy. It's very efficient to manage, but you're doing a disservice to not only those people, but the firm as a whole. I think one of the things I'm going to be really focused on is managing people, setting objectives that they can control and that are going to contribute to the well-being of the firm and success of the business. I hate saying firm. I don't like calling it a firm.
Yeah, and that's another point. We'll wrap it up. But there's a lot of short-termism. It's this year. Let me pull out as much as I can this year. I don't care what happens next year or 5 years from now. And some of that's generational. You got the generational conflict. The partner that's going to retire in 2 years has no desire to invest in the future, but really.
Yeah, that's his retirement check padding.
Exactly.
You don't want to.
But these are challenges. I think they can be addressed. Now, it may be like a Blockbuster Netflix kind of thing where the old firms are going to be hard to change. And maybe it's going to take folks like you starting the new firm and just pave the way and show everybody how to do it.
We'll see.
You'll do it, man. But I love the big vision, man. I love it. I'm a believer in big visions, and I know you can do it. So go for it, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So anyway, John, so thanks for coming on, man. It's been fun. For people out there that want to find you, where's the best way?
jmartin@treebanklegal.com. Email me. I will respond. I love helping people out. If there's anybody thinking about starting a firm, more than happy to talk to them. Can do to help anybody else thinking about doing it. If anybody's interested in the concept, I'd love to talk about it. I think you're the one that tells me always be hiring. Just got to figure out if revenue will support it. Love to talk to anybody that's interested too.
It's a little close. Always be recruiting.
Always do
Yes,
recruiting.
yeah. Yeah. You'll go broke pretty quick if you're always hired. So
Thank you.
cool, man. All right. I appreciate it and look forward to seeing what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.